right, so welcome everybody. Hi, thanks for joining us again at the next Expert Talks Online. I'm John Dickinson, I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Equal Experts. And this evening we've got the next talk in our continuous delivery series. We've had a lot of questions throughout the series on how teams can fit testing into a continuous delivery process. So I'm thrilled to have a recognized industry expert join us today to give her views on how this can work. Lisa Crispin, a testing guru and published author, is joining us today to talk about how to take a whole team approach to quality in continuous delivery. And there's one thing just before I hand over to Lisa that we will be, just to say that we'll be randomly selecting 5 attendees, so people who've managed to come along to the call this evening, and sending them a copy of Lisa's latest book, Agile Testing Condensed. So, and I'll drop a link in the chat for people later. But yeah, just by joining this evening, we'll go through and we'll pick 5 people out and ship those over to you. So that is it from me, short and sweet. I will hand over to Lisa now for the talk.
Great, thank you so much, John. Can everybody hear me fine? I can't see the chat anymore, so all right, cool. Well, it's really an honor to be here. I've only gotten to watch one of these live so far, but I really love this format with the fishbowl, and all the speakers have been awesome, so I'm honored to be part of this. So I've been lucky to work mostly on small cross-functional teams where everybody pitched in on all the activities that are all along that infinite DevOps loop. And I've been a hands-on tester on Agile teams for 20 years, amazingly enough. And I've been lucky to collaborate with Janet Gregory on several books and a video course and a live course. And I've also created my own video course on Test Automation University on Test Automation and DevOps. Test Automation University, I give them a plug. It's a free resource and they have amazing, really high quality courses, so take advantage. And I'm currently just have recently joined OutSystems, and I'm helping to build an observability practice. I'm a member of the quality team, but I embed in the observability and monitoring teams to try to get going with that. And in my free time, obviously, I play with my donkeys. So I'd like to share some of my own team's experiences learning how to build quality into our product and succeed with continuous delivery, delivering small changes to production frequently at a sustainable pace. That's the trick. And I have found that I learn more from having problems than from everything smooth sailing. And so today I'm going to talk about a team I was on that would be seen as a fairly high-performing team. You know, there were awesome developers and designers and product owners. Everybody was really great at what they did. We did test-driven development, basically all the extreme programming practices, pairing 100% of the time, automating tests at all the levels, API level, unit level, API level, UI level, and we, you know, several years ago now, we'd gotten the infrastructure in place. We'd moved our application to the cloud. We had our deployment pipelines. We had our blue-green deploy, we had Pivotal Cloud Foundry and Amazon Web Services, and we were ready to play with the big kids. And so our managers said, oh, let's move towards continuous delivery and start deploying twice a week to production. And it's like, I like the idea of small changes. It's less risky, but we've had trouble deploying every other week, every 2 weeks. So how's this going to work? Okay, well, we forged ahead, and we had my notes won't scroll. Why is that? We had thousands of automated tests, literally lots and lots and lots of automated tests at all levels. Yeah, there were still a few things we couldn't automate. So we had this manual release regression checklist. I wish I could see everybody say, how many of you still have a manual checklist like that? And when you go through a checklist like that, you notice things that are not even on your checklist, but you go, that doesn't look right. Is that in production? Then you got to go look at production, and it ends up being this huge time suck. And So at the same time, we were not doing so well with twice weekly deploys. We'd get them onto the idle of the blue-green instances and suddenly realize there was a problem, or turn it on and have to revert it back. Well, then we had to go through the whole process again. So we had a team of 25 to 30 developers and only 2 full-time testers. So, and we let ourselves get stuck being the safety net doing this silly manual regression checklist. Well, what did that mean? It meant we had no time for exploratory testing or other human-centric testing like accessibility or the security testing where we really needed to do things that, you know, in addition to the automation. So a lot of what we thought were these small changes that we were going to release or deploy twice a week were causing unexpected impacts in other parts of the system. So that was a mess. So what did we do about this mess? You know, one thing we were really good at was reflecting on problems together, retrospectives, trying to identify our biggest problem and experiment, work on that. So we did realize the problem was not enough exploratory testing. That was one of the problems, and we thought it was our biggest problem. And trying to depend on 2 testers to do all the exploratory testing for a team that size doesn't scale. And so the first thing we did actually was just to dump the manual release regression checklist. Nobody else wanted to do it. We didn't want to do it. And newsflash, we never had a regression issue that would have been caught by that checklist after that. So there was a waste of time for many years. And the managers, which I thought this was a brilliant idea, they said, you know what, everybody needs to learn exploratory testing. So they added exploratory testing skills to the skills matrix that developers need to advance up through their career path. So in addition to all these other skills that a developer needs, they've got to know something about exploratory testing. And then they asked us testers, like, please teach us. So we had workshops, we started pairing with the developers, which we'd been asking to do for years, and the development director was like, oh no, you'll slow my developers down if you pair with them. Like, well, wait a minute, they're already pairing with each other. Anyway, it was all good. We started transferring exploratory testing skills. We had copies of Elizabeth Henderson's testing heuristics cheat sheet laminated and distributed around back when we had physical workspaces. And this started working really well. So the developers were responsible for exploratory testing at the story level. So before they could say they were finished with their story, they had to go through and do some manual exploratory testing. We had a little checklist for that too, just to remind them and help them. And then, of course, we were doing tiny stories. So our stories could be done, oops, I think I accidentally, no, that was the right slide. I accidentally, okay, I gotta calm down. Our stories were tiny. So a story was something done in a day or 2. And so obviously an epic or feature had many stories. And so to explore at that feature or epic level, we wrote exploratory testing charters using Elizabeth Hendrickson's template from her awesome book, Explore It. And we put those into the story backlog along with the feature story. So they were highly visible. And then anybody on the team could, when we were ready, could take those charters and start doing the exploratory testing at the epic level. And we also had, you know, test parties where we get together and do exploratory testing, pairing, and that kind of thing. So this started to work really well. We immediately started to catch things before we released them in production, and that all went much, much better. So I learned from Janet actually years ago that when you have a problem, make it visible and then talk about it. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of visuals that I found really helpful for teams that are struggling with continuous delivery and with test automation to help them improve. So I learned about visualizing deployment pipelines from Abby Bangser and Ashley Hunsberger, I guess back in 2017. And this is something that we used to do with index cards on a table or sticky notes on a wall back when we had teams that were co-located. But it's really easy to do. You can use Google Slides for it. You could use a Miro board, whatever, and virtual sticky notes. Just lay out your pipeline. What does it look like? And then you can start talking about how you can improve it. So, you know, we all have even if nothing is automated, we all have some path that a code change takes to get from being committed to the source code repository to getting into production. And so whether those things are automated or manual, we want to be conscious of them, write them out, see what's manual that could be automated, see what needs to be manual, like exploratory testing. How are we going to fit that in? Oh, well, we could use release feature toggles, or, there are lots of techniques we can use, and talk about the stages. So the stages on the left give us the really fast feedback, static code analysis, unit tests, and the tests that run really quickly, and we know right away, did we break anything? The test on the right, it's a longer feedback loop, but it gives us more confidence because at that point, we're testing in a more production-like environment, we're testing through more layers of the application. So we need all these things, but we're overall trying to get the shortest feedback loops we can. And so we can talk about how we can improve by doing this. Now, I'm here telling all of you, oh, you should get your team together and map out your pipeline. I couldn't get my team to do it. So I did it myself. I actually did it on, I think I did it on Google Draw or something. And so I could visualize it for myself, and then I could think of, well, I had a lot of questions about that. And so then I could take those questions to my team. We talked about it, and we did improve our pipeline. So better do it together, but we still got conversations going. So think about your own team's automated test suites, assuming that you have some. There's still lots of teams with no automation. We obviously rely heavily on automated regression tests, performance tests, all kinds of things. And so going back to my story about my team, we had those tests, but we were catching more problems with exploratory testing once we made a focus on that and kind of solve that problem. But we were still having regression failures get to production that should have been caught by the automated regression tests. We just couldn't trust our tests. We had flaky tests, which when we did take time to investigate them, usually it really was a bug and it was just hard to reproduce, and there was some timing issue or something. And we had a very complicated single page Java application. It was a project tracking tool, so lots of concurrent usage, and there were lots of places that things could go wrong. So regression testing and automating regression tests was really hard. So one of the tools that I found really useful, or frameworks that I found really useful, is Ashley Hunsberger's Test Suite Canvas. So this is another great way to guide conversations about your automated test suites that are in your pipeline, or maybe the ones you don't have yet. So what do we want to learn from each test suite? Who benefits from this information we learn from the test suite? How can they find out about the results? What risks are we trying to mitigate? So all the things that will make our suites run reliably and give us value. And I know this is hard to read, but you can download it from Ashley's GitHub repo. And I really highly recommend this as another framework to have conversations. Those are some of my favorite questions. And again, I couldn't get my team to sit around the test canvas and have a conversation. So I kind of combined it with my pipeline drawing. And it's like, oh, these tests are flaky. These tests, I'm not sure they're even really necessary. These tests are really valuable. And bringing those questions to the team and starting conversations with my teammates. And we, in retros and in planning meetings, and we knew we had a problem with them. So we decided to get kind of a cross section of our team together, because 30 people is too much to put in a room and have this conversation. But we've got about 10 people, developers, product owner, customer support people, testers, into a room and talked about, let's look at the high level architecture of our front end, which is really complicated. And let's start thinking what's risky. So we drew the architecture and started writing the risky areas in red, and that helped us prioritize where do we need our test coverage to be. Then we could look at our vast amount of tests that we have, and it's like, what is going on? Why don't we have the coverage we want? One of the problems was just that the tests were not very the developers automated all the tests, including the UI level tests, with no input from testers up to this point. And I looked at some of the tests and it's like, there were not even assertions. Like, what is a test without any assertions? And they were, and although these same developers wrote awesome production code, well designed, really easy to maintain, they wrote really awful test code. So we made a commitment to refactor our tests, start using the page object framework, just start cleaning those things up as we added new features or went back and changed old features. Let's start cleaning up these tests. And again, that helped us a lot. So there are lots of ways to talk about risks. That was one way. Risk storming is a nice way to do it. Just draw on a mind map. Regular old school risk analysis. These are all really good ways to help prioritize where you want to delve into how you're going to identify and mitigate risks. But hey, you know, we have unexpected loads on our system, or somebody accidentally drops a table in production, or there's some configuration file that we didn't configure correctly and it screws up production, or some external API we're using starts returning errors. We didn't expect that. And we can't replicate all these situations in our test environment before we release. It's just, especially with today's complex distributed systems, it's just not possible. And you know, you can't have an alert for something you didn't expect to happen. And so what our team was doing was, oh, we're getting these 500 errors. Oh, we can't reproduce them. What's causing them? Well, let's add more logging here. And now we have to redeploy and wait and see if the problem happens. So that was it took us a long time to diagnose those issues. You can't have an alert for things that you didn't expect. Unknown unknowns. So then we started, this was just when people were starting to talk about observability. It's like, that's interesting. And Pierre Vincent has a really good, he did a really good talk at Test Bash Manchester on this, and you can find that on the Ministry of Testing.com website. Really good metaphor for observability. He's like, well, maybe you have a really fast car, it's really powerful, and you can go really fast, except it's foggy. So you have no visibility, you've got to slow down. And that's kind of where we are a lot of times with our software applications. Whereas airplanes, they can fly through clouds. They go perfectly fast. So why is that? Though they have instrumentation, they can see even when they're in the clouds. So if we instrument our code and collect all the information we need so that we can ask questions to our production system and find problems fast and respond to them really fast without having to add more instrumentation and redeploy. And so our team at the time, we had a lot of analytics tools like Mixpanel, Google Analytics. We had a lot of monitoring and logging tools at Splunk, New Relic, Datadog. And as I said, observability was pretty new, but we started reading the post by Cindy Sridharan and Charity Majors and other leaders in that movement, and it was a big wake-up call for us. And you know, the tools like Honeycomb and Lightstep were not really available yet, but it just really made us start looking more at our production data and learning from it, and using it for other things, like let's validate that the feature we released, did people use it? How did they use it? What features do people want? Let's base that on data. So since then, I've actually worked for a company that was awesome at observability. I mean, they could find a production problem really fast and fix it within a few minutes. That was good because we did a really terrible job of automating our regression tests. And that was fine for a while, but you know, you've got to have the balance. And that's what I like about Cindy's graphic here. It's like you still have to test as much as you can before you release, but you need something to catch the things you didn't expect to happen. So we really need a whole team to do this. You can't just tell the testers, test fast. We're doing continuous delivery, test faster. And I mean, this happens to testers I know. So over the past several years, I've studied a lot on unconscious bias, and we've got a lot of data showing that companies that have more diversity are more successful because there's more innovation. And I think that applies to software teams. you know, in agile development and DevOps, there was always a lot of emphasis on generalized specialists, and everybody should be able to write code and do operations and do all the things. But you know what? I think one person can't know everything, and we've got really complex systems. There are a lot of specialties, and we need specialists. But those specialists should be working to transfer those skills as much as possible. You know, we can't all be have deep knowledge, but we can have basic knowledge, and we can have meta knowledge just from picking up some heuristics over the years. So getting your team together to talk about the level of quality you want to deliver and making that commitment is key. So the teams I've been on that were successful at continuous delivery and being high performing teams, we had that conversation at the beginning. What's the level of quality we want to deliver? Everybody says, oh yes, we want it to be, you know, perfect code that we want to take home and put it on a refrigerator. But you have to make a commitment. It has to be meaningful because you're going to have problems. And if you don't have a commitment to it, you're going to just give up. So find out what the customers value and make a commitment to give them that. Focus on that. So back to my team, we started experimenting with having smaller teams to try to deliver features more quickly, slice those features down smaller, get a little end-to-end learning release out, get some feedback from production. And one of the things that we tried as a new way to approach something is we had a problem where the developers would mark their stories finished and they're sitting there for the product owner to accept, but the product owner was busy and that was a terrible bottleneck. So now they can't merge into master. It was horrible. So we started doing ensemble acceptance test sessions. So when 4 or 5 or 6 stories were done, the developers, for one small team, the developers, the designer, a customer support person, the product owner, and a tester would get together for 30 minutes and test the stories together. So whatever questions we had, the person was there in the room to answer. It's like, that looks a little few pixels off. Well, the designer's right here to tell us. Or that error handling, that doesn't seem quite right. Well, the product owner is right there to say what error handling she wants. We're not having to go down and track that product owner down to get the answer to our questions. So, you know, in half an hour, we go through 4 to 6 stories and either accept them or reject them and do more work. Done. It was such a time saver. And at the same time, we're kind of transferring testing skills because everybody's feeding on each other's ideas. So what makes all this possible? I know it sounds like wonderful unicorn land. We have to build relationships. So I'm on a new team. I'm spending a lot of my time just getting to know people on different teams, not only in R&D, but also in support. You know, take advantage of virtual coffees and virtual lunches, and especially teams that are transforming to Agile or transforming to DevOps. They've been working in those silos and they're not used to breaking out of those. They're not used to working with those other people. It's kind of scary. So how can you do this? You know, invite people to, you know, do a presentation about what you're doing to other people outside of their discipline. Think of the people in other areas, operations, customer support, even business departments like finance and marketing. How can they help you? They can probably help you with achieving your goals. So try to connect with them. So we know from science that psychological safety is a prerequisite for high-performing teams. We know from the studies at Google, the State of DevOps report, all kinds of great science behind this now. And I feel like what we even see from the State of DevOps survey results, more and more organizations are starting to get there. But we need leaders who have a vision. And hopefully, if you haven't read the Accelerate book yet, you will, because there's a whole section in there about leadership and culture, and the leaders need to know how to serve and support people. They need to know how to help people do their best work and get out of their way and let them do that. I've been lucky to be on teams like that, and I think if you haven't ever been on a team that had that magic, you kind of don't know what it's like. So I hope that everybody gets a chance to experience it sometime. One of the problems is people say, oh, we're agile now, let's go fast. Agile, fast. We're sprinting. But that's actually not true. transitioning to Agile is going to slow you down. And what you really need to be doing is focusing on quality, mastering the core practices, the core development practices, and building that solid foundation. It takes time. Learning the business domain so that you can pair every, the customers come to you with, oh, we want all these features and all these bells and whistles, and you can, oh, what are you really trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? And you can pair off all the extra stuff and do less, but still meet their needs. And then that makes you look super fast. So these are all things that take time. We have to make that investment. And it's hard sometimes because business people have to be educated as to why that would be important. I'm a fan of lots of different principles to guide our work. I like the Agile Manifesto principles. I like the Agile testing principles, modern testing principles. But these continuous delivery principles are some that I live by. I think these are good ways to mitigate risks and put more joy into your work because we should be enjoying what we're doing. So don't try to boil the ocean, just try to work on one problem at a time and make it a little less bad. I've talked about all these glorious things we did, but I mean, I'm talking about a process that went over quite a bit of time. So it takes time, but it's really satisfying as you start to make progress. So start getting your team together to talk about quality and ask these questions and have your conversations. So I'm really looking forward to our panel. I welcome questions not only today, but anytime. Just get in touch with me on Twitter or email, lisa@lisacrisp.com. And I can share these slides if you like. These are some of the resources that I used for this talk. So that's enough of me talking at y'all. I'll stop sharing my screen.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yes, are you all right if we share those slides on?
Yeah.
Is it slide share afterwards? I think that'd be great, and then we can link to them from the video.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. So we've got a load of questions already. So if everybody could just go and have a look, see if there's any. I normally I normally ping people in the chat to say, hey, can you just remember to put some questions in? But they were already flooding in.
Hooray!
So
Wow! Need. Yeah.
Hooray! Exactly. So we'll go into the fishbowl now. Everyone just takes a few minutes to have a look at the questions. Add any more in if there's something that sort of you'd like to hear more about that sparked your interest from the talk. We're now going to the fishbowl part of the talk where I will open them up and I will look at I'll take them in priority order. And then just to replay, so I read the question out. Someone from the panel will unmute and say and then have a go at answering it, and then there'll be a conversation. So anybody else from the panel who wants to talk, just unmute to signal that you'd like to talk next. That's a good way of signaling of just managing that interaction. Any participants, if you want to join the panel after after the discussion starts, then if you just hit the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and then Steve, who's in the background, will bring you in as a panelist and boot one of the other panelists out. If you get booted out as a panelist, you can raise your hand then later and be brought back in. So that's it. I'm going to stop talking now because we've got half an hour. We want to get through as many of these as possible because we want to close on the hour because everybody's spending quite enough time in front of screens, I think, at the minute. Right. Last minute voting. Brilliant. Rashmi has a question. It's just overtaken Rob's, which is, how does exploratory pairing work? Anybody want to jump on that one?
I think exploratory testing is much better as a pair, and when I've introduced it to engineers in like a test party or bug bash, I just like test party better than bug bash. It's kinder and gentler, but especially if we have exploratory testing charters, like I say, I like the ones that Elizabeth Henderson uses in her book, just to guide us, like, oh, let's time box like half hour of testing. And I like to do strong style pairing. So that's where you have a driver and a navigator. And so the navigator tells the driver what to type, and then you very frequently, every couple minutes, switch roles. I think that's a great way to test, because when somebody else is typing, you can observe. It's like when you're driving, you can't really look at the scenery, but if somebody else is driving, you have more freedom, and you feed off of each other. So I think that's a great way to do it. It's also a great way to learn. So if you have somebody who's not very familiar with testing, or they're not very familiar with the application, that's a great way to help them on board. And I think it's even better when you get into an ensemble, which is the word we're now using instead of mob, because mob sounds just getting all those different viewpoints, different perspectives. I'm hopeful that we all have different cognitive biases, because they're unconscious, right? And so hopefully if we're all together and we have a diversity of background and experience and whatever, that we're going to see different things and kind of feed off each other. I hope somebody else has thoughts.
I'll chime in after that. I actually have not done exploratory testing as a pair, but I found a lot of success doing it as a team. So getting everybody in the room, and I know you spoke about that, but absolutely, like, you know, we've had team members who have like certain accessibility things that are particular to who they are, and you know, just little things like that. You always find people bringing a bit of their personality, a bit of who they are to what they're looking at and the responses that they have. And that particular type of thing on the accessibility, I found really gets the rest of the team thinking about things like accessibility when they might not particularly, you know, have that concern themselves. So yeah, I absolutely agree on that.
I can go ahead. One thing I found helpful is when during the exploratory pairing session, if you pair someone from a role that is not same as yours, they can kind of point out things that you tend to take it for granted. So for instance, in one occasion, when I was pairing with a BA or the product owner actually, right? So there are things in a page that we think like we think it is fine and keep going, and then the product owner can suddenly could point you out like, why you haven't tried that particular thing, or just can you try clicking certain things that you wouldn't usually take into consideration because you assume it is working, or you kind of don't think it is part of the necessary journey. So that kind of adds value. It could be a developer who could say like, there's something that you're not doing the right way, because the developer will have an insight how the code has been built. So you might be able to share some kind of inputs that you, as just pure exploratory testing outside like a black box student, you wouldn't consider. So things that might help. And also it could, the other person, the navigator and the driver concept, like, so they could help you to keep focus, because exploratory testing, if you're not charted properly, it can become like a chasing the rabbit hole. Like you find something and then you keep clicking, and then you kind of forget why you were there in the first place. So the other person can kind of help you to keep you in focus, saying like, okay, this is what we want to do. Let's focus on this, get this done before moving away from that. So yeah.
I'd like to expand on what Ishwar was saying as well. And I learned this fairly recently when I was pairing I was quiet for a while, and the person I was pairing with paused and asked if I was getting bored or what was going on, because obviously pairing's meant to be a active exercise. So and also it's a social endeavor. So you know, if your partner's a bit quiet, you know, they may be thinking about it, which I was. So I paused and explained, and you know, we explored a bit more. So be mindful.
Great. Excellent. That's a great one to kick us off there. Thank you, Rashmi. Yeah. So Rob's question has floated to the top again. So what does bad testing look like to you?
I can start with this. To me, especially, it's probably applicable for any methodology that you follow, but the farther away from we find a bug, I think that is where that would look to me like something wrong with the testing process. I mean, it's probably cliche to keep saying that the earlier we find the bug, it helps. But I think there's a lot, even from metric point of view, it makes a lot more sense why it is important to find bugs a lot more earlier, right? So the moment the bug starts drifting away towards closer to production, then I think for me that would be seen as a bad testing. I mean, bad probably is too strong word, but there's probably a gap in the process to see that teams can try to address.
I can chime in here too. Well, one of the things that this question kind of makes me think about is, and actually, I don't know if should we have been introducing ourselves. Hi everyone, I'm Julie. I'm a technical principal at Equal Experts. I am a mobile engineer mostly, but history across a lot of engineering. Yeah, so one of the things this kind of makes me think of is like the dialogue around how do you get buy-in from stakeholders? So how do you get the business to like value testing? And I feel like that really ties into like what's a good test and what's a bad test. And like kind of how I see that work is the things that you should be testing are the things that are the highest value to the business. And so having that dialogue around what is the most critical thing that could break and like why is it critical, kind of tying into what Lisa is saying about what the users think is important. I think that's part of it, but it's also kind of what the business sees as important. And it goes a little bit beyond what the customer thinks is important. So I think all of that stuff really kind of ties in together.
Okay, great. And then we've got in the chat, Viv Richards is adding their views. So doing testing at the end, not collaborating. This is all examples of their view of bad testing, things which don't add value, and automating things for the sake of automation. I particularly like that last one. Okay, so we will move on to the next question. Thank you, Rob. That was a great question. So we got next question is from Gary, which is, do you have a view of optimum developer to test ratio within teams?
I've gotten this question for the last 3 decades. And there is no answer. I just feel like today, in our modern era, we have to let go of that completely and just say, you know what, everybody has to learn about testing. The whole team has to take responsibility for it. I think we do need specialists, but I think the modern testing folks, Alan Page and Brent Jensen, have it right that, and Janet and I have been saying this for a number of years too, as testers, we need to be consultants and coaches, because like I say, all the teams I've been on lately have had very few testers. I mean, at OutSystems, we've got, I think, 11 or 12 quality, we call them quality owners, which is, I hate that name, but for a R&D organization of like 280 people, we're trying to get the teams autonomous, take responsibility for quality, take responsibility for testing. We'll help you. We can provide a lot of help for you, but the whole developer ratio always implies that there's some testing team off over here, and that works in some domains, no doubt, no doubt. You have to do what you have to do. So in some domains, you may need to think about your ratio, but I think in the sort of the modern agile world, you can't think about it that way.
Go, Rob.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of build on that one. To me, there is no real sort of good definition to say what the right ratio should be and what it could be. I think that it could be down to there is now seems to be a bit of a blurring line between developer and developer tester these days. Although from my own personal approach, I agree with Lisa, is that at the end of the day, you can't generalize too much, otherwise you start diluting the capability. So I've always felt as though the moment someone becomes more of an automation tester, they're actually becoming more of a developer as opposed to actually understanding what needs to be tested. What I always look for is making sure that you know, within your sprint team or within your team that's actually delivering stuff, make sure you've just got a really, really good and astute tester. You know, a person who has the ability to think around corners, because that is paramount to your ability to deliver actually a good quality and a good, you know, a good quality system and a good quality series of tests and application. I don't like calling them unicorns because that's false economy, but you know, seeking out a good tester, someone who's not afraid to put their head above the parapet and try something different, that's what you've got to have. You know, if you just have one of those in your team and the rest of them are just developers that are going to create tests for them or are going to do some, as you said before, some pair testing, then that is, I wouldn't say it's optimal, but that is your best start you're going to get. And after that point, it's what feels right to you.
Great. I've got a couple of people have picked up on the phrase "think around corners." I think that resonates quite well with everyone, Rob. Ezra, you're unmuted. Were you going to say something?
Yes, I was going to say maybe not a direct answer to whether there's a ratio, is it? But what I would rather add is it's often equated tester equal to testing, in the sense like if there is no tester in the team, then there's no need for testing. But I would go around the other way, saying like you depending upon the team size and the organization, you may not have a tester initial part of your phase of development, but doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing testing at all, right? So we're talking about the quality as a whole team approach. So it doesn't matter whether there's a tester. Obviously, the tester would eventually come and can grow the testing standards of the team, but that doesn't take away the need for not having to test. Then if we stop thinking through that particular mindset, then there's not really need for question for the ratio is probably not a question itself in a way, because then the quality was owned by the team, and there's probably one person who kind of helps this team to achieve this quality, and this can be somebody like a product owner who knows the product well and then can help teams, like saying this is where we have to focus on and the kind of bugs they discover on the kind of things that they need to do about. So the way I see the agile teams has been evolving. The ratio of tester to developer is always going to be like going towards zero, is what I would say. There's probably like one or two testers maximum working across cross-functional, across multiple teams, more like Lisa mentioned about like more about coaching rather than they doing themselves hands-on testing.
Great. Okay, so excellent question, Gary. Thank you. I really like this next one from Ollie. This is a thorny one. Can you give an example of what a commitment to quality looks like? What parameters do you consider?
Well, I guess I should answer since I'm the one who said that, but it is kind of hand wavy, but you know, it does kind of boil down to, yeah, we want to write code we'd be proud to take home and show mom. But I guess so the commitment's an important thing. So I'll give an example from a different team. So we were committed to quality, and one way we thought we could achieve quality was through test-driven development and behavior-driven development. So we wanted to have that shared understanding up front, turn concrete examples guided by our business rules into executable tests, and then as we wrote the code, automate those tests, and then we know we're done, and when all the tests are passing, and then we can explore. So we started off with this great idea, and then when we got into it, we realized the architecture of the product, which we had no control over, it was a big company. We could test at the unit level, we could test at the UI level, we could not get at anything in between. And so we had intended to do this BDD more at the API level. But we couldn't do that. And we're like, well, test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development through the UI, that doesn't sound like it's going to work. But this is back in 2009. But you know what? We said we were going to do this, so let's try it. So we had mock-ups of all the screens. We had placeholder IDs and everything for the elements. So we use a given one that, we used a Gherkin format, and we made our automated tests and put in the placeholder names. And as we wrote the code and put the real names, we could start making those real things and then run the tests. And to our great shock, it actually worked. It was really effective. So we wouldn't have tried it if we had not really made that serious commitment. So that's kind of what it means. I don't know how to tell you. I think it involves doing a lot of small experiments with a hypothesis for that small experiment and measure your progress, because I think it has to be a step-by-step thing.
I can add to that. Just an example from the team on at the moment, where we do the kind of testing that Lisa's already described before we put something into production, and then when we put something into production, we're monitoring it very closely as a team to try and measure its impact on both users and the kind of the platform it sits within. And our commitment to quality means that when we see something that we know is like a deviation from normal behavior, either an increase in warnings or errors or unusual behavior that users would be experiencing, we firstly quantify that to understand what's the level of this impact. Is it a high enough level that it's something we need to jump on immediately, or is it something that is very, very small? Normally, if we see something that's a deviation from normal behavior, though, or the kind of previous behavior that we think is a bug, we fix that bug immediately as part of the story that was just released. We don't raise a bug for it, put it on the backlog, and come to it later. So my kind of view of a commitment to quality is that we ensure that we're always improving the quality of the system we're adding to, and we're not allowing it to degrade, both from an end user perspective, but also from an operability perspective, that we're making the system or service easier to operate.
Lim here. I guess for those that don't know, I'm a tester as well. And my current team, our commitment to quality comes from, we take a business view, because quality ultimately is really you're working in business, and you're driving, revenue and things like that. That's your ultimate goal. So that's how we see it. Being quick to deliver, having tests and all this, all drives towards that. So when we think about quality, the team's commitment to quality is to be able to deliver quickly, deliver customer value quickly. And the other thing also then comes to operational questions. Do you want to be woken up by this? And really that question, if something goes wrong, do you want to be woken up in the middle of the night? And that question really drives how much pain can what you deliver, are you willing to tolerate, right? Or more importantly, the business can tolerate. So I work in retail and e-commerce. It's a tolerable problem is if one product wasn't displayed, but it's a different matter if whole suites of products are displayed, like whole categories of them. So you got to weigh these things out, and that's how we define it. So when we come to the time where your question about this commitment usually happens is when there's a production bug, or when you find a bug in general and how quickly you want to get it fixed. And this is when you start exercising this commitment to quality. The other thing also, we do treat it as somewhat of a, particularly early on in the team's formation, a living sort of commitment, because it's probably it's almost certainly a fallacy to think that you're going to form a team, come up with some sort of mission, and you're set for the next 10 years, or even the next 6 months, right? That it doesn't work like that. You form your ideas as a team and your culture, and how much you want to commit to this. And I think with that in mind, then you can iterate on that, and all of this becomes a lot more palatable for the team as well, especially if you're trying to bring your team forward.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on that too. I mean, absolutely, Lim, like I agree 100%. And kind of what I'm hearing there that resonates with how I operate on my teams is like this shared buy-in on what should be like the highest, like what should be watched, what should be important in terms of quality, and then continually revisiting that over time as a team, you know, all the way up to your top business stakeholders. Really, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. So we're gonna go. That was a really good question. Thank you. There are loads of questions that we're not going to get to. So we're going to go with one last one, which is John's Estale's question. But it's a good job that there are so many left, because that's perfect for the next expert talks, where it will be a full fishbowl panel session. But I'll say more about that at the end. For now, John Estale is asking, given that you admit you can't test everything, how does one decide whether the release is good enough for production, and then, for example, and won't corrupt the database? And Viv has kicked us off here by saying taking a risk-based approach to help focus on where to test, given you won't be able to test everything.
Can I start? I'll give this a shot. So I'll start off with this. This actually ties into what bad testing looks like to me. So one thing I often try to explain to my co-teams that's in my current organization is that we automate a lot, and we rely heavily on our automated tests. And the reason we do that, and the reason we have the ability to do that, is the foundation that tells us that we've mitigated enough of the risk. Granted, you can obviously do some manual stuff, but we lean on our automation quite a bit in this case. That's a bit of context, but that's what we do. So this is how we mitigate it. But that being said, we also grew our tests. We review, we made sure it covered the right amount of risk and things like that. We never advertise that we've tested everything, and we definitely never advertise that what we're deploying is bug-free. But what we do advertise is that if there is a bug, we can either roll back very quickly or fix forward very quickly, one of the two. And when I say quickly, within an hour. To roll back like 5 minutes. So bringing it back to the bad testing, you've got bad testing when you've got thousands of tests and you're still not sure whether you can deploy. That it's debatable whether your automation is adding enough value. So that's my take on it.
So, sorry, I'll give you a brief background about myself as well, so you don't think I'm a fraud. I've been in IT for about 25 years. 15 of those was working as either a tester or head of tester or test manager. So, rule of thumb I always used to use: does it actually work? It's a crazy question. You might have thousands of test cases. You might have executed, half of them might be automated, half of them might be purely manual. But it comes back to what Lisa was saying. Draw out the system. Yeah, a lot of people these days just don't do it. They don't systematically go through, how does this system work, or how does this application work, and then just check it. And if it works, then that's the best you can do. Totally agree with what Lynn was also saying, all right, okay, what are the parts that are really going to get me out of bed? What's going to make it all really painful for us if it doesn't work? Put those as your priority, that you're going to say, right, I've done the regression test, I've done all this manual testing, I'm now going to pick out a small subset that if those bits go wrong here and now, we have a problem. and execute those as your final step. But also, and this is something that probably a lot of old school QA managers and test managers were taking a deep breath and get really bad about, testing live. It's a scary concept, but when you do that first release, get you guys to jump on it before it's either released fully to the public or before anybody else, because they will know whether that system's working or not quicker than what the public will. So as soon as it's released, it's gone into production, jump on it, check it, if that's still working. All you can then do is just leave it up to, you know, the testing gods and fate at the end of the day, and hope that your team has done an excellent job.
Can I chime in? Yeah. So just to add to, I think it's pretty much what I'm going to say is similar to what Lynn said, right? I mean, the basic thing is like to go to production, yes, it meets the acceptance criteria, yes, is a very fundamental thing. The other way I look at is what could potentially go wrong and what is the impact of it, and what is the, how quickly you can get a feedback, right? This is where I see the whole continuous delivery doing its magic, in the sense like if you can go to production and then roll back to a previous version within 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or with a very short duration without much impact, then you will be able to be more handle these risks a lot better than rather than looking into whether keep guessing whether a particular issue would work or not and how you can handle it. Similarly, the metrics that you have in production that can give you feedback about like how quickly you can be notified when there's an issue and things like that, right? So when all these things are in place, then I think teams will be more confident about what they take into production rather than constantly guessing whether something will work or not.
Okay, brilliant. So that is it. We are going to leave it there. And I saw, Lisa, I saw you saying in the chat that if anybody wants to follow up on any of these questions, they should feel free to reach out to you. So I hope you don't mind me just shouting that out again. And you're putting some great ideas in there as well. So yeah, but that we are coming up for 7 o'clock now. What I wanted to finish up there and just remind everybody that that we will be selecting from the list of attendees. We'll be selecting 5 people to send them a copy of Lisa's latest book, which is Agile Testing Condensed. Next week, we're going to finish off our continuous delivery series with an expert clinic, where this is going to be a fishbowl discussion on the subject of continuous delivery. And we're going to have not all of our speakers, but quite a few of our speakers coming back onto the panel for that. So we'll have Dave Farley, who'll be joining us again. So Mr. Continuous Delivery. We've got Lindsay Pruer, who has led the introduction. Well, it was on the panel tonight, but has led the introduction of Chaos Days at many of our clients. Stuart Gunton will be joining us again. He's the head of our security practice and the leading author of the Secure Delivery Playbook. Ben Conrad, who gave his great talk about HMRC, how they've used continuous delivery to help respond to the COVID services they had to deploy at pace. And Lisa will be joining us again. Am I right that you'll be able to come back? Fantastic, that would be excellent. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining this evening, for your excellent questions. I would normally run through people's names, but there are too many to go through. And thank you to our panelists. So thanks, Lindsay, Julie, Lim, and Eswar. Also, thank you, Rob, for joining us. I think this is the 3rd time that you've put your hand up and come in, which is fantastic. I love it. It's great to see you jumping in. And again, a huge thank you for Lisa for the talk this evening. It was absolutely brilliant. So thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time. And just pop onto the Equal Experts site, look for expert talks, click on the or sign up for the next one next week.